What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am your host, Michael Melito. Today's going to be a special treat, as normally Fridays are a rerun show, but I got a new patron, and he requested a show on Browning high powers, so I feel obliged to do that. And I try and schedule my episodes well in advance. When things happen this week, like my Hummer breaking down, me having to sell it because I'm stranded in the middle of Nebraska and don't have the resources to fix it, I'm okay because I have a little bit of buffer there, a little life lesson in there for you. However, I wanted to get this episode out fairly soon after he gave the request, so thanks to him, I will just not put a rerun out on Friday. I'll put this episode out. That's the plan, God willing. I don't know that he wants to be named, but you can thank the new patron for that. I probably would not have done an episode on the Browning high power anytime soon without that suggestion. So if you like this episode, or you want to support or give input on what you'd like to hear, a lot of the episodes that you hear come from either the Patreon chat or requests. If you want to become a patron, I would be humbled. If you want to just send me a message, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com, and there should be a link for Patreon in the show notes. Anyway, with that, I'll plug in the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic, Browning high power. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. Alright, gunfighters, I am gonna caveat this with, I am not a Browning high power connoisseur, right? I cannot tell you the ins and out of, oh, this marking means this, and this antler marking means that Hans von Berenstein's proof house in Belgium made this in 1939. Like, I'm not that guy on the Browning high power. There are guys who are just encyclopedias of knowledge on the Browning high power, and that is not me. So just know that this is not like a complete deep dive into the Browning high power. There's probably somebody out there that could do an entire podcast, episode after episode after episode, on the Browning high power. Anyway, caveat complete. The Browning high power is an amazing gun, right? It is an amazing gun. I was thinking it was made sometime in the early 30s or 40s. When I looked it up, it's designed in 1926. 1926. Now, you could argue that the 1911, and I love 1911s, is the first really modern handgun, right? I may argue the Luger, and the Luger is a great gun, right? I was blessed to know an older man before he passed that had one, and we were out at the range. He liked to shoot, I like to shoot. He handed it to me, and I was shooting a plate much smaller than a head plate, much smaller than the standard head plate that I shoot, I believe, if I remember correctly. I was ringing that time after time at 25 yards, first time I picked up that pistol, with this old original. I don't remember if it was like World War I or a little bit later, but it was old, and it still ran, and I was pinging steel with it. That said, it's a very complex design. One of the great things about guns is you look at their lineage, in general, their designs get simpler. Look at the amount of moving parts and things in a Luger versus a 1911 versus a Glock, right? And they get simpler. The Luger is a great gun, and it's, obviously the first semi-automatic 9mm, but I wouldn't call it a modern handgun. I would call the Browning high power a modern handgun, and it had the great providence of being chambered in 9mm parabellum, which we have come to standardize on. It is a great round. If you listen for any length of time, you know that I switched to that round on my own as a police officer back when everybody said you had to have a 40. And I thought so too. I was issued a 40 and I went to a 45 because I thought, 45's got to be better. And I started doing competition shooting and running things on the clock and actually looking at it objectively and saying, no, this is not right. The 9mm has to be better. I remember doing a time trial, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember shooting very similar gun in 40. It was probably my duty gun versus my gun that I had started running competition in 9mm, and I was able to get several times more hits in a given zone in a given amount of time. Let's say the timer gave me 2 seconds. I was able to get many more hits accurately with the 9mm than the 40. And I looked at that objectively and thought, I don't really care what everybody else says. That's a more effective round. So I switched to it long before it was a cool hot thing, and it's come to be known that it really kind of is that perfect balance of speed, I mean shootability wise, shot recovery time, the amount of recoil that's comfortable to shoot in a standard size handgun. It has enough power. Now, the old Full Metal Jackets weren't great, but modern bullet construction and terminal ballistics have come a long way. So it was chambered in that round, which is awesome, which makes it still relevant. It was a double stack 9mm. At the time this thing came out, a 13 round 9mm handgun, slim, sleek, And let's be honest, it's a beautiful gun, right? That's one of the cool things about it. I appreciate beauty in a gun. I like guns for their utility and everything, but obviously, I mean, I'm doing this show. I have a passion for guns. I think the Browning High Power is a beautiful gun. I'm not exactly sure, again, I'm not a connoisseur, how many of the design features were designed by John Browning, but it definitely has that kind of look and feel to it. It is a beautiful, classic gun. Beautiful lines. And it's my favorite operating system. I know everybody seems to like polymer striker fires, right? But I like a single action hammer fired gun with a safety. That's my jam. That's what I'm about. In trials and in my experience, I think that's the best system. Single action. If you have gotten to the level where you can take advantage of a nice single action trigger, now, and just basically have a gun without that additional safety, which you're probably never going to use. So, a great gun. And they came right about the time where the metallurgy was becoming modern, and they're just a wonderful gun. And to think that, it was being designed even prior to 1926, and it's been in service from 1935 to the present, and there's been so many iterations of them. So many. And the fact that it came with a tangent rear sight, right, that adjustable leaf rear sight, some of those versions, I would love, and I wouldn't do this because I'm not a collector, I would love to have one of those, maybe just at the range, and actually shoot that thing out to 500 yards. If you don't know, some of them came with rear sights that adjusted back to 500 yards. I would love to take a 9mm handgun and ring steel at 500 yards. That would be awesome. Produced 1935 to 2018, and then a short break, and it's still being produced. In fact, there are 2 new variants of it. The Springfield, I think it's called the sa-35, and the FN model. Now, if you've listened for any length of time, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of a lot of the Springfield handguns. However, I have never handled, I've never shot an Springfield sa-35, their version of the high power. If, in fact, that gun works, it would be the very first Springfield handgun that I have ever encountered that worked decently. Maybe it is. Maybe this is their gem, right? Maybe it's not a Croatian-made plastic pistol like a lot of their guns are. Perhaps it runs better than the one Springfield 1911 that I have that didn't run. Even for 1911 standards, it was very unreliable. But perhaps this is the gem. Perhaps that is the one. Perhaps they got it right on the Browning High Power. Because after all, I mean, that design's been around for coming on 100 years. So maybe they got that one right. The FN. And I don't think I've ever actually handled one of these. Beautiful guns. Especially the FDE finish. It kind of takes that classic gun and makes it a modern look. Now, I'm not the biggest fan. I really like the FN rifles. I love my FN Scar. I have not had good experiences with the modern FN handgun, the FN 509. I was sorely disappointed in that gun. In fact, one of the worst guns I've probably ever bought. But that's a one-off. Actually, no, it's not. One of the guys that used to work for me as a professional gunfighter when I was the commander of a tactical team, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, I thought that he got an FN, maybe an FNX or whatever the one prior to the 509 was, and it didn't have rifling in part of the barrel. I'm not even making that up. He took it to a training class. Don't do that unless you've thoroughly tested your gun. Don't buy a new gun and expect to go through a training class with it. So that was on him. But what wasn't on him was, I got reports back because he was one of my guys. I heard he'd been through the training that the bullets were keyholing at like short distance because the something in the rifling in the barrel was not right, which is not something you would expect from FN. Anyway, the FN Browning High Power looks like a beautiful gun, assuming it works, and they've taken some of the tweaks out. I do think that they got rid of some of that nastiness in the trigger, giving it a nice single action trigger from the reports that I've heard. They also made the ejection port bigger. If you look at the original ejection port, and that's one of the ways you can tell the ejection port kind of got larger over time in the Browning High Power. Kind of look at it and tell when it was made, at least from what I understand. The new FN made that even bigger, so it's got a more modern open top. That's one of the reasons the Beretta is so reliable, right? The entire top is open. So unless it's some really, really weird thing, there's almost no chance of a double feed in a Beretta where you get like a stovepipe where 2 rounds are in there, because it's just so easy for it to fall out because the entire top is open. One of the good things about the design. And them, I think, making that ejection port bigger makes a lot of sense. The fit on it, the finish on it, it looks really good. I have no desire to have one unless they make an optics cutout version, but even then, I probably wouldn't. It's not my forte. If they have one and I shot it and it had an optics ready version, maybe I'd be intrigued by it. I do believe theirs takes 15 or 17 round mags. If I remember, the Springfield takes 15 and the new FN takes 17. Do your research on that. I'm not 100%. They probably have aftermarket mags, or somebody's going to make them where they have even more capacity. But a truly modern handgun, the fact that, though I probably wouldn't get one if I was going to work for some agency and they were going to issue me the new FN high power, and that was going to be my duty gun, I wouldn't cry about it. I wouldn't be like, oh, you're giving me some old piece of junk from 1926. This thing's not going to run. Like, I wouldn't feel undergunned is the point of that, which to me makes it like a truly modern, relevant handgun that dates all the way back to 1926. The big comparison, and always, I think, I've always considered it being compared to, is the 1911. I like the 1911. That's why I have no desire to have one of these. I would probably get a 1911 optics ready. I have 2 STIs, which is basically a double stack 1911. They're just, STI went out of business. They didn't go out of business. They changed their name to Staccato. They kind of have a new business model, and they're kind of classics, the ones that I have. Now, they're beat up. I use them as duty guns. They're not safe queens. They're ridden hard and put away wet. Not literally. They are ridden hard, but they're put away dry. But anyway, I have a hard time cutting those. It's kind of like taking an old 57 Chevy and cutting the top off and making it a convertible. And they were never originally a convertible. Maybe I'll do that one day. I have a hard time with it. That's my big setback on the Browning High Power, is I'm so much more knowledgeable and familiar with and shoot 1911s so well that I don't know that I would go the high power route, especially when they're the double stack 1911s. Like, I like the STIs, the Staccatos. But maybe I would. I've never actually taken them both out to the range. Perhaps one day I'll be somewhere where somebody will have one and I'll do some drills with an FN high power versus a double stack 1911. I love history. I love the history of guns, as you might surmise from episodes of this podcast. But when it comes to, this is gunfighter life. When it comes to my life or your life on the line, if there's an active shooter or something like that, I want the best tool for the job. The lineage and the look and all that other stuff it's the icing on the cake. I want what's best to keep you breathing and me breathing and get the mission accomplished. I don't know. I'd have to run a Browning High Power through the paces in comparison to an STI 2011, or I guess now the Staccato, or I would consider that kind of its contemporary, or with one of my general go-to carry guns for CCW, which would be a SIG 226 Legion single action only. I would consider that kind of in that same category. Single action, hammer fired, safety, double stack. Now, that's not a classic gun, so I had the top cut off of it and mounted for an optic. I don't know if you could get the new FN or one of the newer, high powers, one that was made, in like 2017, 2016. One of those high powers, if you could get the top cut off of it. I certainly wouldn't do it to like a 1930s Browning high power. If you could get the top cut, and I'm not a machinist, if you could get that cut and direct mounted for an RMR, that'd be a pretty cool thing. As you might imagine, it being around since 1935, in addition to the new ones we talked about, there's some really cool variants. The Mark I lightweight alloy frame, that would make a pretty cool carry gun if you could find one and you wanted to just be tactical from days of yore. That would be a pretty cool way to go. These were, because they were around right when 40 was the new hot thing, they do make a variant M40. That has really no appeal to me, both because of the caliber and because it was originally in 9mm, so they got it right the first time. You kind of like ordering a steak at a restaurant and being like, no, I changed my mind. I'll have the tofu imitation burger. There are a bunch of other cool variants of this. If you wanted to be a gun collector, I'm not putting gun collectors down. I'm just not one. I appreciate that people collect guns because I appreciate them. The Cody Firearms Museum, or I think it's the NRA Museum in Virginia, Those are amazing resources, and it's cool that people collect those. If you were going to collect a handgun and you wanted a, let's call it classic historical handgun that was still modern and relevant, so you could get one of the new versions and carry it and collect all the older ones, the Browning High Power would be an awesome choice for that. I guess I had more to say on the Browning High Power than I thought. It's a pretty cool gun. Here's an endorsement for you. If you said I had to carry either the new FN High Power, or let's say one of the 2016, 2018, one of the later models of the Browning High Power, or the creme de la creme, right? One of the ones I didn't mention, but the Nighthawk. The Nighthawk, for sure. If you don't know, Nighthawk is known for their high-end custom 1911s. They also did their take on the Browning High Power. You said I had to carry one of those on duty or carry one of those as a CCW versus a Glock 19 or 17, I would take that all day long. Why? I think it's a better operating mechanism. I like hammer-fired, single action. I think that I can get my first accurate round off better, more consistently. Without firing it, I'm pretty confident in that if it has a good single action trigger. If you were telling me to run Mozambique drills at 3 yards or on the buzzer, go get a good single headshot in, I think that my accuracy would be more consistent with that gun and my time would be better with that gun than a Glock. If you're a beginner or a new shooter, you have so much other things to smooth out before you have to worry about that last tenth or hundredth of a second on the trigger. May not make a difference to you, but I think it really does have merit. And I would certainly, assuming I could run it and make sure it was reliable, right, take it through its paces, because even a Glock, I've had brand new Glocks that didn't work. My wife just picked out a new carry gun last year. Maybe it was still this year, 2022. Anyway, brand new Glock. Thing didn't run out of the box. Brand new Glock 42. I've had another Glock that I bought that had problems right from the factory. So I wouldn't assume just a Glock is going to run either. A lot of people say that, they're like, Glocks are reliable, always reliable, and they generally are. But they'll take it and they'll run a couple of hundred rounds through it. Well, our general, when I was commander of a tactical team, our general, just initial class was over 2,000 rounds in a week. Yeah, I've seen Glocks with issues. Assuming that the Browning High Power ran and was reliable, I'd probably take it over the Glock if they were comparable. So how's that for an endorsement for you? A really cool gun with a really cool history. I think it has the distinction of being, there might have been some other obscure things, but really the only mass-issued handgun of World War II that was used by both sides. Meaning like the Allies used it and the Axis powers used it. That just kind of tells you how good it is, right? When the Germans invaded Belgium, they were so impressed with the high powers, they kept production going. They were like, no, we like these. Let's keep making these. We're just going to stamp them with our stuff. That says something about the design of that pistol, especially compared to everything else around at the time. They had their own handguns that weren't bad, but they looked at the high power and said, yeah, let's keep this ball rolling. And that's probably a better endorsement than mine. That's pretty cool, and a pretty cool gun. With that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. Guys, if you like this content, your support is appreciated. I'm humbled that you listen, and I'm very humbled by everybody that chooses to support. Again, if you do, go to Patreon, mostly because you want to support and believe in the message, but also, I believe the raffle for the really nice knife will still be going on through November. So last day of November, I think I'll cut it off. Any new patrons will be entered in a raffle to win a really nice knife. And I'm humbled because one of the patrons actually said, hey, if I offer up one of my knives for new patrons, what do you think? And I was very humbled that they offered that up. I mean, that says something, right? That somebody in the community appreciates you that much. It means a lot more to me than just a knife. We're going to raffle that off for any new patron in the month of November in the year of our Lord 2022. You got a chance to win that. Also, Patreons get a bunch of cool insider content. I did a special Patreon only episode for, the guns of the zombie apocalypse. How could you go without that gem? But that was a fun thing that I did for the patrons. But there's also a lot of really good content on there. Content only for the patrons. I really appreciate them, and I try to give them some value. There's a ton of shooting drills and old training videos and stuff on there. And if you want to, you get to be part of our insider chat, and we talk all the time. to ask each other questions. It's not just me. There's a lot of guys in there that know more about certain subjects than I do, and I'm humbled and blessed to be a part of that group. Anyway, enough about that. As a thanks for staying tuned till the end of the episode, the tactical tip of the day. Whether it's a Browning high power or a Glock if you have to. I'm just kidding. They're not bad guns. Or a 1911, which I really like this on. There's a lubricant that I've been using for a long time. Not on your fine moving parts, not on your trigger mechanism, but on your slides and your barrel to slide fit where you get all that wear and tear, and your slide to frame fit where you get all that wear and tear. And like on a bolt action rifle or on like a SCAR or something like that, the beefy bolt, I probably wouldn't put it on an AR bolt. But it's called Hyperlube. You get it in the auto parts section. There's a lot of good oils in the synthetic oil for motor oil that you can use on guns. But this Hyperlube is thick, like it's stringy when you put it in your fingers. It's like the string cheese of lubricant, and it is smooth. If you put that on a slide, it is awesome. If you put it on a bolt, it just makes it buttery smooth. Especially if you're going to do high volume of shooting, where like you are going to shoot hundreds of rounds today through your gun. I think it greatly diminishes the wear and tear and the metal on metal, let's say, stress that gets put on a lot of guns. When I extend the life of your guns, I highly recommend Hyperlube. It comes in a big container, like a big cylinder container. You'll know I'm talking about the right stuff because when you get the bottle and like turn it over, you kind of see the air bubble rising through it. It's maybe a little bit thinner than, strawberry jelly. And a bottle of it is big, and if you only using it on guns, it's good on engines too, which is what it was designed for. But if you're only using it on guns, you would have to shoot a lot to go through that bottle. I don't think I've ever actually gone through an entire bottle just using it on guns. And I shoot a lot. I usually take a little bit that's left over, put it in a smaller bottle, and save that for guns and use the rest for its intended purposes, as good as its original intended purpose. But that Hyperlube is awesome on guns, on the big, beefy, high-stress parts, right? It's a little too thick, viscous to be putting in like a trigger mechanism or something, but on slides, on barrel-to-slide fit, on bolts, it's awesome. That is your tactical tip of the day. Tactical verse of the day. If you listen, I went through some trials this week. Lost the beloved old mobile studio, right? I thought I was going to keep restoring that old Hummer and have it for a long, long time. Hopefully pass it down to my kids one day, God willing. However, it broke down. My wife and I going across country. I agreed to go back east of the Mississippi so she could be with her family for this part of the year. She's got nieces and nephews and things she wanted to see. Anyway, in Nebraska, roughly halfway across the country, the Hummer had some pretty severe issues, and I normally would fix it, but I didn't have the time or the infrastructure or the tools to fix it, so I had to sell it. By God's grace, got a new truck. It was an ordeal. It kind of felt like Groundhog Day in Nebraska. Every day I woke up for, I think, over a week thinking I was going to be leaving that day of Nebraska, and every day I just woke up again in Nebraska. It was like Groundhog Day. All that to say, there were some trials this week, which comes to the verse of the day. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Is it an ordeal to be broke down, in Nebraska, 6 degrees, -9 wind chill, one of the locals told me, with no heat and all kinds of troubles? Yeah, that's not cool, right? That's definitely a trial. But think about the Apostle Paul, who wrote big swaths of the New Testament, shipwrecked, beaten, stoned, and eventually martyred. So, really put it in perspective, right? Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Thanks, men, and have a blessed day.